Harold Benton had once been the kind of man who drew respectful nods when he passed. The crisp crease of his army dress uniform, the bronze glint of a medal pinned just over his heart, the quiet, steady eyes that had seen more war than any man should. But now, at 65, he moved through the city streets like smoke present, but barely noticed. Baltimore had changed in the years since his last tour. The corners were meaner, the people walked faster, and Harold, now homeless, was little more than a ghost drifting past store windows and shuttered memories. Each morning began the same. He rose before the sun, brushing off the cold dew from the bench in Lincoln Park, adjusting the frayed strap of the same duffel bag he'd carried since Kandahar. He would walk aimlessly sometimes to the old marina, where the smell of salt and rust still reminded him of the troop carrier ship. Sometimes to the downtown library, where a security guard named Lester occasionally let him warm up near the lobby heater. Harold rarely spoke unless spoken to. The silence felt safer. His words, like his medals, were buried deep in things no one asked about anymore. Most days he skipped breakfast. On lucky ones, a church volunteer might hand him a paper bag with a bagel and a warm apple cider. But more often, Harold just tightened his belt and moved on, his body long accustomed to absence. He didn't beg, didn't panhandle. Pride was the last battle he refused to lose. When asked, he'd simply say, "I'll make do," and move on. But even the toughest soldiers have breaking points, and Harold reached his one frigid Thursday morning when the wind cut so sharply it made his knees buckle. He'd gone 3 days with little to eat. His jacket was threadbare, his gloves mismatched and full of holes, and the soles of his boots were separating like tired lips. He paused outside Brewster's Marquetta small corner grocery on Lexington Avenue. The inside lights glowed like fire. A rack of oranges by the door shimmered with frost. The hunger in his stomach screamed. Harold stepped inside. The heater was a wall-mounted unit, but to him it might as well have been a fireplace. He hovered near the fruit section, hands trembling, eyes darting. No one seemed to notice him. The cashier, a bored young man with headphones in, barely looked up. Harold touched an orange, then set it down. His stomach twisted. He reached for a packaged sandwich egg salad, slightly expired. He could hear his breath loud in his ears. "This isn't stealing," he told himself. "This is survival." He tucked the sandwich and a bottle of water into his coat. He hadn't taken 3 steps toward the exit before a voice cut through the air like a gunshot. "Hey, old man, what's that in your jacket?" Harold froze. Slowly he turned. The store manager, stocky and red-faced, pointed a finger at him like a loaded weapon. "I asked you a question," the man bellowed. Harold opened his coat wordlessly. The sandwich slid out and hit the linoleum with a quiet thud. The water bottle rolled under a nearby shelf. The silence that followed was deafening. "You think you can just walk in here and take whatever you want?" the manager shouted. "I was going to pay, just didn't have it now," Harold said quietly. His voice was rough, unused. "I haven't eaten." "Save it for the judge," the man snarled, already dialing 911. "I've got him on camera." "Theft. Let's see how you like county jail." "Thief." Harold didn't resist. When the officers arrived, he didn't lie. He didn't cry. He simply handed over the sandwich, kept his hands visible, and answered every question with a quiet, "Yes, sir." The younger officer, Jenkins, seemed almost uncomfortable as he gently pulled Harold's arms behind his back. The metal cuffs felt like a cruel joke to a man who'd once worn dog tags and carried wounded brothers through enemy fire. "You a veteran?" Jenkins asked hesitantly as they walked toward the squad car. "Yeah," Harold said. "Long time ago. Doesn't count for much now." Neither officer said a word after that. At the station, Harold was fingerprinted, photographed, and placed in a holding cell. The floor was cold. The walls were painted the color of defeat. A metal bench stretched along one side like an accusation. Harold sat quietly, holding the edges of his coat around him like armor. When the booking officer handed him the official charge sheet, misdemeanor theft, unlawful concealment, he simply nodded. It wasn't the charge that hurt. It was the look in the officer's eyes. Not hate, not anger, just the distant mechanical indifference that said, "You're nobody now." Later that night, under flickering fluorescent lights and the smell of bleach and regret, Harold reached into his inner coat pocket and pulled out a small, creased photo. The edges were curled, the ink faded. A young woman smiled out from the frame, holding a baby girl with a red bow in her hair. His wife, Teresa, his daughter, Jamie. He hadn't seen either in over a decade. The war had taken his body. The silence afterward had taken everything. "Else I'm still here," he whispered, looking into their faces. "I'm still trying." In the morning, he was escorted to Baltimore District Court. The van was cold, the chains unnecessary. He wasn't going to run. He had nowhere to go. The courthouse loomed like a fortress built not to protect, but to sort. Inside, dozens of people milled about lawyers with messy folders. Files like grocery lists. Harold was led to a defendant's bench and told to wait. He sat still, his hands resting on his knees, his eyes fixed on the polished floor. People stared. A few whispered, but no one spoke to him. Case number 4761. State of Maryland versus Harold Benton, the clerk announced. Harold stood slowly, feeling the tight ache in his joints. The judge, a tall man with steel-gray hair and a posture built in the Army, glanced down at the docket. "Mr. Benton," he said, monotone, "you've been charged with misdemeanor theft. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Harold replied, voice even, eyes forward. The prosecutor stood, young, ambitious, probably 2 years out of law school. "Your Honor," he began, "the defendant was caught on surveillance, stealing food and drink from a local business. While the value is minimal, the state recommends a short sentence in county jail given the defendant's lack of address and prior minor infractions." The judge didn't look up. He flipped the page in the file. Then something happened. A piece of paper fell loose. Harold's VA discharge record. The judge's eyes paused. He reached forward, pulled it closer. Name, Benton. Harold E. Rank, Staff Sergeant Service Branch, U.S. Army Conflict, Operation Enduring Freedom Decorations, Bronze Star, Purple Heart discharged, honorably. 2007, the judge's brow furrowed. He sat back, lips parting slightly. Then he truly looked at Harold. There was a silence, a heavy one. Then the judge said, softly, "Staff Sergeant Benton." Harold blinked. "Yes, sir." The courtroom hushed. The clerk lowered her papers. The young prosecutor hesitated. The judge stood. Actually stood, straight up, eyes locked on Harold. His voice tight with something just under control. "This court will recess for 10 minutes. Bailiff, escort Mr. Benton to my chambers." Now, there was no objection, no questions, just movement. And Harold, confused, dazed, followed the bailiff down the quiet hallway, unaware that the name he carried like a scar had just cracked open, a door that had long been welded shut. The walls of Judge Raymond Ellsworth's private chambers were lined with books-thick legal tomes, their spines faded with time and use. A quiet place, removed from the sterile rhythms of the courtroom. But this morning, silence did not bring clarity. It carried ghosts. Harold Benton stood by the door, uncertain. The bailiff had offered him a chair, but Harold chose to remain standing. Old habits? Don't sit unless ordered. Don't speak unless spoken to. His eyes scanned the room like a soldier gauging cover bookshelves. A cracked leather chair, a dusty flag folded neatly in a triangle on the shelf. Judge Ellsworth stood by the window, his back turned. The morning light framed him like a shadow, remembering how to be a man. "When were you with the 3rd Battalion?" the judge asked quietly. Harold blinked. His lips parted, but no words came at first. He hadn't heard that question in over a decade. 2003 through late 2006, Harold finally said. Kandahar, Helmand, a few places that don't exist anymore. The judge turned his eyes, sharp beneath his glasses, studied Harold, not the tattered coat, not the calloused hands or unshaven jaw, but the eyes, the soldier's eyes, the ones that had seen hell and somehow kept moving. "You saved my brother's life," Ellsworth said. Harold froze in November 05, ambush at the West Checkpoint. Harold's memory stirred like a dust storm. So many certs, so many names forgotten. But Sengen, that was one he couldn't forget. The smell of wet concrete, the pop of sniper fire from the rooftops, a young corporal screaming into a radio, then dragging a wounded soldier behind cover while Harold laid down fire with a shattered rifle. "Your brother Jason." The judge nodded. Double quotes, "He made it. Lost a leg, but he made it. Wrote us about you. Said if it weren't for some staff sergeant named Benton, his name would be etched on a wall by now." Harold looked down, suddenly ashamed. "I didn't do anything special, Just didn't want to leave another man behind. And now look, the judge said, walking slowly to his desk, picking up Harold's crumpled VA discharge paperwork. We left you behind. The silence between them thickened. This court sees dozens of theft cases every month, Ellsworth continued. Petty crimes, desperate choices, but when I saw your name, Benton, H.E., my blood ran cold. I thought, no, it can't be him, not that man. Harold didn't respond. His throat burned, pride and shame warring inside him. Why didn't you come to the VA? The judge asked, almost angry now at Harold, but at the system, at himself. Why didn't you apply for housing or medical aid? I did, Harold said quietly, in 2008, a year after Teresa died. Got sent forms, lost half of them moving from shelter to shelter. The other half didn't matter. They said I didn't qualify without a permanent address. PTSD, not officially diagnosed, no doctor to verify. My benefits, they just dried up. The judge exhaled sharply. Jesus. Harold smiled sadly. I used to pray to him too. Didn't hear much back. He looked up. I'm not looking for charity, sir. Just, I was hungry, that's all. Ellsworth shook his head. You don't need charity. You need justice. He picked up the phone on his desk. I'm calling a recess for the rest of the morning. I need to make some calls. In the meantime, you'll have counsel, good counsel, and not another night in holding. I didn't ask for no, the judge interrupted, but you deserve it. 10 minutes later, Harold was seated on a padded bench outside courtroom 3, still cuffed, but this time the bailiff had left the chain loose, not as a prisoner, as a man waiting for something he hadn't expected in a long time, someone to fight for him. When the judge returned to the bench, the courtroom wasn't empty anymore. Word had spread quickly. A few veterans from the local American Legion sat in the back row, their faded jackets pinned with old medals. A middle-aged woman from the Baltimore Sun hovered quietly with a notepad, sensing something larger than a petty theft trial. And beside Harold. A tall woman in a charcoal blazer opened her leather briefcase with efficient calm. Mr. Benton, she said, extending a hand. I'm Alicia Moreno, Veterans Legal Defense. Judge Ellsworth contacted U.S. personally. Harold hesitated, then shook her hand. I don't have money. You won't need it, Alicia interrupted, her voice warm but precise. You served. Now it's time someone serves you. The judge's gavel rang once. This court is reconvened in the matter of Benton versus the state of Maryland, Ellsworth said. Before proceeding, I'd like to inform all parties that I have authorized a review of Mr. Benton's military and medical records, and have referred this case for federal inquiry into VA benefit disruption. Effective immediately, Mr. Benton will be represented pro bono by Ms. Moreno. The prosecutor, clearly stunned, stood and cleared his throat. Your Honor, the state was unaware. Yes, Ellsworth interrupted. You were. We all were. That's the problem. Alicia stood. Your Honor, we request a dismissal of charges based on humanitarian grounds, wrongful termination of veteran benefits, and the extenuating circumstances of Mr. Benton's situation. I've reviewed the preliminary files, said the motion is granted. All charges against Mr. Benton are dismissed with prejudice. The gavel fell again, not loud, not harsh, but final. The echo carried through the room like a bell tolling for forgotten. Names finally remembered, Harold sat motionless. It was over. He was free. But something in him refused to believe it. Years of surviving had made him distrustful of hope. It wasn't until he really looked up that it hit him. Everyone in the courtroom was standing, not for the judge, for him. Veterans in old jackets stood with tears in their eyes. The reporter lowered her pen. Even the bailiff removed his cap and placed it over his heart, and behind them, in the back of the courtroom, a man walked in wearing a prosthetic leg and a Marine Corps pin. His eyes were wet. Jason Ellsworth, the judge's brother. He didn't say anything, just raised a hand in salute. And Harold, after a long, breathless pause, stood, shoulders straight, chin lifted, and saluted back. Not for applause, not for victory, but because for the first time in years, he remembered who he was. The city of Baltimore doesn't often pause to honor quiet men. But that week, something shifted. The day after his charges were dismissed, Harold Benton woke not to the clank of cell doors, but to the soft knock of possibility. He sat on a clean bed at the Baltimore Veterans Recovery Center, still unsure whether it was real. Fresh sheets, a modest room with sunlight breaking through beige curtains. His boots rested neatly by the wall. A staff nurse had left him a tray with scrambled eggs and toast. And for the first time in years, Harold ate every bite. 2 days later, he had an intake appointment with Dr. Lee, a VA trauma therapist who didn't ask him to explain everything, just invited him to begin, and Harold did. Not all at once, but in pieces, about Kandahar, about Teresa's death, about the empty apartments and nights under bridges, about the silence that grew louder than war. Dr. Lee didn't interrupt, she only listened. And Harold, unused to being heard, found that the words tasted like healing when spoken aloud. Meanwhile, Judge Ellsworth had done more than dismiss charges. He had written letters, made phone calls, demanded reviews, and what started as a quiet legal motion grew into a local movement. The Baltimore Sun ran the story on the front page, Forgotten Hero, the trial that uncovered a system's silence. Photos of Harold in court, saluting back at the judge's brother, were shared across state lines. Then, the national networks picked it up. Within a week, Harold's story appeared on morning talk shows and veterans forums. People wrote letters, sent donations. Dozens of veterans who had slipped through similar bureaucratic cracks came forward, but Harold didn't bask in the attention. He kept his mornings simple. Up, shower, attend group sessions, speak to Alicia about his benefits review, sit in the park and watch birds flit through leafless trees. And sometimes, when he was alone, he would hold the photo of Teresa and whisper, "You were right. There was still a road back." 2 weeks after the court date, Alicia entered his room holding a thick envelope and a trembling smile. They reinstated everything. Harold, full VA benefits. Retroactive, 18 years. Harold blinked. How much? She handed him the letter. He read it, and read it again. Then looked at her, stunned, double quotes, $269,000, he whispered. Alicia nodded. Plus housing, health care, full enrollment in the Veteran Rehabilitation and Reentry Program. You're going to be okay. Harold sat down slowly, the paper shaking in his hand, but not from fear, from the weight of something unfamiliar. A future. That weekend, the city organized a small public ceremony at the Baltimore War Memorial. It wasn't grand. Harold had refused anything extravagant, but it was meaningful. The mayor gave a short, respectful speech. Judge Ellsworth stood beside Harold, reading from a proclamation that officially recognized him as a citizen of honor and distinction. A local elementary school choir sang America the Beautiful. And when Harold stepped to the podium, in a new navy blue coat and tie, the crowd fell quiet. He didn't speak long. "I didn't ask to be here," he said. "Didn't want cameras. But I figured maybe if someone like me is seen, then someone else out there won't feel so invisible. That's all." He looked out across the audience, veterans, families, strangers. We come back from war expecting to rebuild our lives, but sometimes the battle follows you home, and sometimes it wins. He paused, but not this time. A murmur of applause followed. Not wild, not theatrical, just human, true. After the ceremony, as the crowd thinned, a woman in her early 30s approached quietly, a toddler on her hip. She wore a dark red scarf and nervous eyes. "Mr. Benton," Harold turned. The woman stepped forward. "I'm Jamie." He blinked. "Jamie? My mom. Teresa. I'm your daughter." The photo slipped from his coat pocket, as if summoned the girl with the red bow. Now grown, standing right in front of him. "I saw the news," she said. I thought you might not want to see me after all this time." Harold's knees nearly gave out. His hands shook. "I've wanted nothing but that," he whispered. Jamie smiled through tears. "I brought someone to meet you." She knelt, setting the toddler down. "This is Nora, your granddaughter." Harold fell to his knees, eye level with the wide-eyed little girl. "Hi," he said softly. Nora offered him a crumpled flower. "You look like a hero." Harold took the flower. "That's because, today, I don't feel invisible anymore." That night Harold stayed not in a shelter, but in a guest room at Jamie's home, modest townhouse with warmth in every corner. He sat at a kitchen table covered in photos, stories, and laughter. Over dinner, he told Nora about sandstorms in Afghanistan, about how he once survived on MREs and jokes, and how her grandmother had written letters that smelled like lavender and saved his sanity in 1,000 ways. 3 months later, Harold purchased a small house on the edge of Baltimore County, not far from Jamie, not far from the world he'd once fallen out of. The porch had a swing, the kitchen, a window facing sunrise. His first morning there, he brewed a pot of real coffee, sat on the porch with a flannel blanket, and let the sun warm his face. He adopted a rescue dog named Scout. They went on walks, ate breakfast together, watched old movies at night, and every Friday, Harold volunteered at a local homeless shelter for veterans. He didn't lecture, didn't preach. He simply sat, listened, and nodded when others talked. Sometimes that's all a broken man needs, to know that he's not the only one. On Memorial Day, Judge Ellsworth visited Harold's home for the first time. They stood in the backyard under a waving American flag. Said little, but between them, there was no need for words. "The scar," Ellsworth said quietly, "where the shrapnel hit." Jason kept it framed in his room. Harold nodded. "Tell him I remember." I think he always knew. The two men, one who had been saved, stood shoulder to shoulder in silence. At sunset, Harold returned to the porch. Jamie and Nora joined him. Scout curled at his feet, and as the last light of the day slipped beneath the horizon, Harold looked at the sky and whispered, "I came home, love, just like you asked me to." And for once, the silence didn't hurt. It healed.